I've just been trying to think of how to begin talking to you, and I found myself noting down three concepts that have been on my mind in recent times. One of them is the idea called the genuine progress indicator. This is an idea that is being introduced in several states in the United States at the present time and is being talked about at places like the Crawford School of Public Policy at the ANU. And the idea is that you discount from gross national product that is to say, the economic measurement of the condition of our society by the depletion, the measured depletion of natural resources. And if you do that, if you actually think about what we're losing from the environment and our natural resources, as well as what we are gaining from economic activity, then there are those who argue that we've made no progress at all since about 1980. The second one is that there's a growing literature now that says if you want to stop the depletion of the environment, if you want to restore the ecology, if you want to restore environmental values, then you have to leave about half of the landscape in the hands of nature. It's not as hard to get to 50% as sometimes seems. There are parts of New South Wales, for instance, where it's clear that there's something close to 50% right now. But there's a growing scholarly thesis that says that there are some kinds of things that cannot be done except by the organisation of collective impact. It seems like an extraordinarily simple idea, except no one thought about it so clearly until quite recently, and only quite recently have we been able to make organisations that work like that. So it's for that kind of reason that I think that the Great Eastern Ranges is a tremendously important initiative, and it was started by the New South Wales government, but by definition, if it's going to be successful, it has to be actually sustained and developed by the people that are part of it, which is why it's a great pleasure to see so many of you here today. And those people won't be able to do that unless they have some feeling of inspiration.
My name is Neil Ingram. I'm a proud Wiradjuri man, born and raised in a little community called Condobolin. Before I go any further, I just want to acknowledge traditional owners of this land, the Wiradjuri people. I acknowledge the land on which we are gathering. I acknowledge our elders past and present. I acknowledge all the elders who are present here today. Before I go any further, when we come on country, it's very important for us to seek approval from our ancestors. If we are sitting here talking, the ancestor spirits are here, they're with us, and they think we are talking about them. So we normally make some noise, and I ask ancestor spirits to give us permission to come on country, seek their approval, tell them that we mean no harm, we come in peace. The purpose of our meeting today is to look at better ways of managing our land, our waterways and our environment. Thank you, our spirits. The type of work we get involved in, we collect seeds, we propagate, we grow trees, we plant trees. We manage all the weeds and pests on country. We've actually leased the nursery at Tafe and Orange. The reason why we've done that is to test our capacity to go alone. At the moment we are operating based on funding from the Biodiversity Fund for the last couple of years. We are at the stage where we don't want to depend on funding, we want to fee for service. So we have contracts in. We have a good partnership with the local land service, National Parks and Wildlife, Cabonne Shire, Orange City Council. What we do is just word of mouth. We pass the good things that we do, but it's really about this wonderful country we have. So it's about managing our country the right way.
This sort of thing is very useful in resource sharing of, and it's not necessarily about resources, material resources, it's knowledge and skills. So, and rather than reinventing the wheel, there's lots of people out there doing stuff, and I think it looks bad to the community if everyone's out there doing the same thing over and over again. So this way, you're talking about what you're doing, and not doing two people doing the same thing, so the community don't get, I suppose they get a little bit of, they're just doing what that other group's doing, I'm not getting involved with this, and there's money being wasted here, they're doing it, we're talking, we're working together, and the resources that and money available in the landscape from Great Eastern Ranges K2W is going strategically where it's needed and not doubling up. And I find all the agencies working together is great.
And so, in particular, I've been working on some questions that look at land use. And I'm really fascinated by the idea that animals use different types of agricultural space very differently. And yet we know nothing about this, but we know there's biodiversity all around us. I've counted 16 birds just sitting here already. That have been using just this riparian area, and it's already getting hot. So when I walked down, there were 3 types of lizard that I saw in those rocks coming down, and it's those animals that use those spaces that we need to understand a lot more about, because otherwise we won't be able to ensure viable populations or that 50% target of biodiversity. Yeah. So I've been working on another project which is looking at how animals move through different landscapes. It's quite fascinating. So we're finding that certain species of lizard and other animals are capable of moving very well through different types of pasture. And I'm halfway through now collecting this data through the Great Eastern Ranges, which has been excellent. But already we're seeing tight signals that cropping landscapes have a massively strong effect on the directionality that animals move. It's not what you'd expect implicitly, but it matches other studies in other parts of the world. It's really quite neat. But we're finding that the direction that pastures and crops are sown can heavily influence the dispersal, the movement capabilities of animals. And so there's opportunities immediately to try to rectify that.
So what do you mean by that? Sorry, you mean if they sow the wheat this way, what happens? What's happening? What have you found with your species?
Well, they don't cross the tiller lines. They only walk directly down the direction that the tractor's driven, exclusively. Like they don't even move 3 or 4 rows of crop. They just walk directly down. And I know that because I've been coding animals all through the country in this amazing fluorescent powder, which involves, which it gets all over you, so it's a bit nasty. You can kind of see a bit of an example of this colour here. It's ultraviolet, so what you're able to do is get these really fantastic short-range movements of animals by coming back hours after they've been released with this powder, and you can track their movement. And getting down on all fours, you can really see the really fine-scale decisions these animals are moving. Because, I mean, we know with crocodiles and with turtles, they use magnetic force to orientate themselves on their mass migrations in oceans and even on land. And small reptiles, the skinks and the geckos, they have exactly the same hardware, the same machinery, but we know nothing about their decisions to move across the landscape. Like, do they use star patterns? It's quite possible for nocturnal species, because it's really hard to see a rocky outcrop if you're a tiny gecko and you're sitting in the grass that's about this tall. You're very likely to perish unless you have some smart way of getting to where you need to go, and we're only just catching up to this knowledge now. There was a fantastic study that looked at cows on a global scale and showed that cows were all orientated on a similar axis. And it was all purely because of a wind direction, and it's obvious to any farmer. But using that sort of information, we can start to understand how biodiversity might respond to natural phenomena. And with reptiles, and with geckos in particular, we're finding that if we can understand that these animals move only on certain cues or with certain conditions present, then perhaps we are able to manipulate them for their positive benefit. So if you have two big patches of bushland and currently crops are running this way, for example, and this is just one example of the results that I've found so far, then that animal is going to have a very tough time connecting across that landscape. And in fact, it won't.
Yeah.
It won't happen according to this animal that I've looked at. But if you're able to incentivise or perhaps work around practical reasons why you may not crop in a directional sense, and there may be good reasons as to why, but if we can work around that, we might instantly build up the connectivity of this landscape for wildlife. And so that's what we're working on now, and not just in cropping landscapes, but also in pasture landscapes that relate to grazing. So looking at what the effects of grazing might be on these movements of animals and how we might get the optimum results for grazing.
Well, K2W, I guess, has a focus as being part of the Great Eastern Ranges, which is something that I think we really need to engage with landholders about, so they understand that their particular property is part of a smaller landscape, a regional one if you like, K2W, but also part of the Great Eastern Ranges is a bigger thing. So whatever they're doing on their own property is contributing to a much larger cause. So
Do you think that makes a difference for them?
it should, but I think we need to communicate with them. And the issue is that many people don't think that their land is actually worth anything. They don't understand the value of it in terms of connectivity and in broader terms across the landscape, nor do they understand the biodiversity values on their own property. I think if we can convince people of the value of their land, they might think twice and think, well, maybe yes, I can contribute to that land. Particularly in agricultural areas such as this, much of the land that is still has biodiversity values is not agricultural land. So there's no loss of production necessarily in putting land aside under a conservation agreement.
So my name's Mick Roderick. I work with BirdLife Australia, formerly Birds Australia. I work on the Woodland Birds for Biodiversity project. That project kind of morphed out of the Regent Honeyeater and Swift Parrot projects, which some people might be familiar with here. They're two of our most highly threatened woodland birds, but not only are we focusing on Regents and Swifties these days, but we're looking at a whole suite of temperate woodland birds that are basically disappearing. There's many species that are in heavy decline in the temperate woodlands, and we only actually know this stuff because of gathering information and doing monitoring at all the various sites. And so that's where I step in to the K2W area. We're running a project at the moment. The project is two-folded. First of all, we're updating some existing woodland bird priority habitat mapping that we have, and that's actually right across the temperate woodlands of southeast Australia. And again, that uses information gathered by the general public submitting records. But there's only so much that bird watchers can do. There's only so many places that bird watchers can go and gather this information. So the second part of the project is a real push to try and get landholders and the general community interested in actually collecting some data as well. And to that end, I'm looking for ideas of places to run workshops where you will learn things about identifying woodland birds. We ran a workshop in the Kapiti Valley last year. We had 70 people present. It was great. The weather wasn't great, so when we stepped outside to practice what we'd just been learning, we didn't see a lot of birds, but that doesn't matter. There were some really basic concepts, and for me it's more about getting to the point where it's recognition as opposed to identification. So it almost becomes automatic. And for birdos, I mean, we often don't need these things because, like Gordon mentioned, when you step into a woodland, it's all about hearing birds. When you're on a mudflat, it's a bit different, but in the forests and woodlands, learning the causes is really important. So this is all the sort of stuff that we'll be covering in these workshops, and what we hope to then carry on after those workshops is actually getting people doing some regular monitoring in the landscape.
Absolutely amazing the way these guys work. If you've never done it, you really should. It's probably better than a ride at the show. They'd pull up in their cars and they would get out, and you couldn't hear anything. Well, I couldn't hear anything, and they'd just start rattling off species. Blop, blop, blop. That's a such and such. How many? 4. Da da da. Got notes, and off they go. It's just incredible, and they're listening for the birds, right? So they can't see them, so they can hear them, and it's absolutely amazing. So in the 2 days the Woodland Birds Group were here, they identified 71 species, and 2 of those are threatened species. The superb parrot, which we all recognise in this environment as a threatened species, and also the little eagle, which I didn't know was threatened. And so I can tell you also that in the Wyangla landform, on the siliceous soils, where we supposed to have red stringy barks and iron barks and tumble down gums growing, that's the habitat that supports the little eagles and the superb parrots.
Yep. And so that will then inform like who's growing the seed and where they're planting it. And,
that's right. So we can collect our seeds, we can go back into the right place in the environment, put the right tree and veg communities, including the shrubs. We know that some need water. They'll need water. Some can rely on crops or silver wattles for seed. We can provide the food and provide the habitat. The key is the hollows. I think that's the biggest challenge. I'd say it'd be a long time before we actually have those.
Well, the thing that I can't do and people on the ground can do is know what's here right now, what's flowering, what's seeding. We can get people engaged in seed collections. We can get people engaged in planting on the ground. I can't access the landscape in the same way that a partnership like this can. When we get people on the ground engaged and passionate about restoring the landscape, then I can actually get a lot more value out of the research that I do.
And I think the thing that really stands out the most when you look at the maps back in the watershed itself is the fact that where we're actually investing is in those really critical connections. Central Tableland, LLS, particularly Gus Arnott and Mel Henry, in terms of the work that they did out on the ground with people, really helped us to focus in the dollars on doing things on the most critical connections in the landscape, but also providing the foundation for us to be able to start and link up individual activities across the landscape, working within the context of Landcare and other community groups to get a framework of works happening on the ground that then allow us in 2015 to be able to start to pull together the different investment themes and actually pull together some of the new opportunities from the types of work that we've been hearing about to really value add the work that's being invested through the K2W project.
The massive opportunity is that we can cover a bigger area, and combined we get greater leverage to do a better job. If everyone were to go out there doing their own little pieces and they never join up, we actually never have a system that functions. So by joining together, we create a much better picture. Yeah, it's very simple.